Hello, everybody. Welcome to Stamp Chat. I'm Eric Spielvogel, Director of Education here at the American Philatelic Society. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you with us tonight. This is episode 8 of season 1 of the 2023 series. This one is Stamp Collecting 101, part 1. This is a 2-part talk, and ideally this is designed for developing stamp collectors, folks who are new to the hobby. We know there will be a lot of you in here that are not new to the hobby, and so we're going to have a very diverse group here. Welcome to all of you. For those of you who are not new to stamp collecting, this will ideally be a nice refresher for you and give you some other ideas. Our presenter this evening is Ken Martin, Director of Expertizing here at the APS. For those of you who have been a part of the APS or stamp collecting, Ken Martin needs no introduction at all. You know who he is. If you are new to the APS or to stamp collecting, then we're thrilled to have you joining us tonight. Thrilled to be introducing you to the hobby. Thrilled to have you as part of the APS. And looking forward to introducing you to the man referred to here as the APS's Swiss Army knife. Just a little bit about Ken. If you don't know who he is, he began as a volunteer here at the APS as a student in 1980. He became a full-time staffer in 1995 and has worked practically every job here at the Society, from sales to education to shows and administration. He's a philatelic chief judge and a collector and exhibitor of blood donation philately, a passion that mirrors his real-life commitment to blood drives and donation events. For this Stamp Chat, we'll focus primarily again on the beginning of the stamp collecting experience. Some of the things that many of you who are experienced collectors might want to be asking Ken may have to go to the next session, but we'll get to as many questions as we can. So this will cover the basic language and definitions of philately and how to acquire, handle, and store stamps. Now, a quick bit of house cleaning. For those watching the presentation live, your microphone and camera are disabled during the presentation to keep the bandwidth open for the presentation. To engage fellow attendees, please make comments in the chat section, or if you have a question, use the question feature, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can at the end of the presentation. If we can't get to all of them, and we probably will not, tonight there is another session, and we'll also have some capacity to, you can ask questions after the fact. If you're watching this later as a recording and not live, please feel free to ask your questions in the comment section. This program is provided thanks to generous support of APS members. And if you're not already an APS member or would like more information about our services, please visit our website at stamps.org. Ken, the Zoom floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to just get started. Tonight, we're going to cover why collect stamps, what you might want to collect, some methods of acquisition, ideas for how to organize your stamps, and some basics on handling and storage of stamps. The part 2 in 2 weeks will go and we'll cover stamp varieties, condition of stamps, tools, caring for your collection, some basic terminology, and some ideas to learn more information. So I wanted to give you an outline. If you ask things specifically related to what's going to be covered on the 24th, we will probably defer that until then. But you're welcome to send the questions. We'll keep them. I can modify the presentation, perhaps to plan for some of those things if I know the questions in advance. So it's fine to share them. Even what won't be included in either parts. This is supposed to be 101. It's supposed to be basics. We're not going to be talking about valuing, selling, or investment in stamps. That's beyond 101. We're not going to talk about stamp production or technology, such as printing types, paper types, color shades. Maybe touch very minimally on some or explain that there's some differences, but we'll reference catalogs a little bit, but we're certainly not going to explain differences in catalogs or explain all the features of catalogs. So catalogs will not be covered in depth. There's no plans to cover anything on grading, expertizing, or authentication, or exhibiting. Those are definitely probably not even 201, probably 401 or 501. So definitely not for tonight. Okay, this is going to be presented as stamp collecting as a hobby. There are some people that will do it as an investment, but the APS in general tries to support people in a hobby where they're doing it for enjoyment, for pleasure. And a hobby, for the most part, there shouldn't be right or wrong ways. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't suggest some things that you may not want to do because they're very likely to damage your stamps or something like that. But I'd certainly never tell somebody what they should collect or what they shouldn't collect. That's your decision. In general, that's one of the good things about stamp collecting or philately, broader than just stamps, that you can choose what you want. Virtually nobody can collect everything. It'd be very difficult even if you had unlimited resources. So what are some reasons to collect stamps? Well, I said fun, pleasure, relaxation. Most of us have busy lives, enough things going on. Hopefully it's a way to get away from some of the pressures at home or elsewhere. Forget about work, do something, lose yourself to your stamps. Many people, some get started or others find it a way to particularly enjoy the hobby is doing it with a family member or a friend. I was introduced to stamps by a couple friends in the 5th grade, but other people may be introduced by a relative, a parent, a grandparent. And in some cases, they may spend Sunday afternoon together looking at their stamps, comparing stamps and so forth. Certainly not a requirement, but that's something that stamp collecting can be a family-friendly hobby. Some people like it to learn about the world, I'd say, especially geography and history. Yes, you have the internet now, but looking at postage stamps, you can certainly learn a lot from, contested territory with maps, showing part of a country, another country perhaps as part of the country of issuance of the stamp, basically claiming territory, or the rulers of the country, or major events in the country, or the artist and all the exceptional people that the country honors as their best people, so to speak, are typically honored on stamps. For some people, it can be a low-cost art collection in a couple ways. One, I show you here 3 stamps that are famous paintings, basically, that most of us could never afford to own. But as postage stamps, you could get all the 3 of these stamps for probably under 50 cents total. You can certainly own masterworks that you could not actually own the original painting. Plus, just any stamp, whether it's a reproduction of a famous artwork, is essentially art. There are not many engravers, the traditional engraving of stamps, and people that they're really artists, and there aren't a lot of them around any longer. And they add their own expression and interpretation to many stamps. Stamp collecting can be as social a hobby as you want it to be. If you don't want anybody else to know about that you're a collector, yeah, you can do it in your, and you can have a room at home where nobody else is supposed to enter and not have interaction and not tell anybody that you're a stamp collector. On the other hand, there are many people that enjoy going to shows or maybe even participating in a chat board on the internet. And one of the reasons for them being in the hobby is the social interaction. Maybe a different group than their work group or their local community or their church group. It's a different group of people. So it can be, you can define that how you want it. Unlike some other things, if you're a golfer and you're in Pennsylvania, you probably only have, I don't know, a few weeks left realistically to golf. Generally speaking, stamp collecting you can do year-round. It's an indoor activity, and it's really not dependent on the weather. It's not dependent upon physical skills in general. If you have a problem with your eyes or eyesight, that's going to be a challenge. But in general, there's a lot fewer restrictions on it, including it does not have to be expensive. You can get lots of stamps, maybe not as many as you used to, just off your own mail through the mail, or from friends or from relatives or from businesses. There may be lots of duplicates, but you don't have to spend a lot to acquire a lot of stamps. If you want to spend a lot, sure, you can go to a major auction and spend $1 million for a single stamp if you want, but most of us are never going to be in that category. And going back, I guess, to the golf comparison, at least stamps may provide some residual value. You purchase stamps, they probably may not be as worth as much when you go to get rid of them or sell them as they were, especially in inflation adjusted dollars or whatever, but there's probably some residual value. If you do a round of golf, unless you're Tiger Woods or somebody, I doubt your scorecard, you're going to be able to sell that for anything. So I think there's more residual value than some other hobbies. So Eric referred to, we were going to ask you to participate. And this is the first of 3 times. Thank you, Scott, for bringing this up. We'd like to know how you got started, or if you've gotten started, or what's interested you in stamp collecting. Okay, so still today, it looks like family member, friend, 2/3 of everybody. About 1 out of 5 have been interested by a specific stamp or philatelic item, got them interested. About 1 of 10 were inherited or given a collection, which I think has gotten them started. And special promotion, I'm assuming that's something like getting a flyer with your electric bill from Mystic Stamp Company, asking for 10, offering 10 stamps from, before 1920s for $1 or something like that. There are a few companies that do those types of things. Does not look, at least among our audience here tonight, that reaches a huge number, but our audience tonight may not be representative of everybody, certainly. Thank you for answering that. Okay, so what to collect? We talk about stamp collecting, and in the upper left corner is what I'd call a typical standard stamp. But some people collect lots of other things, and it's your choice what you want to collect. The middle top row is basically a meter from Finland. It's a pictorial meter. It looks fancier than many meters that we normally see in U.S. mail, but it's certainly a method of paying for the mail, and certainly nothing wrong. On the top right is a very early Christmas seal. Doesn't pay for any postage, may often be put on an envelope, even today. And they're listed in the Scott Specialized Catalog. Some people would say, absolutely not. It has nothing to do with actually paying postage, but it looks like a postage stamp. If that's something that you want to collect, that's fine. There are very prominent collectors who collect Christmas seals. Nothing wrong with that. We also have just like a permit. Not too many people are likely to collect those, but I believe we do have an affiliate, a national specialty organization related to collection of permits. It can be a private permit, as I believe this one is, or it could be a government permit, perhaps from a government department saying that postage and fees have been paid. Revenue stamps. Some countries, not the US, but most of the British Commonwealth, their postage stamps are good for, or many of them have been good for either paying for postage or for paying for revenue fees. The US, generally speaking, has had different stamps for revenue, and there are federal revenues. There are also many state revenue stamps. And postcards. I just have a sample postcard there, but that's related. Some people will collect postcards, APS wants to be inclusive and serve everybody. And generally we'll take a pretty broad definition. We know there's some traditionalists who wouldn't want to collect anything other than the stamp at the upper left, but it's a hobby. You're supposed to do what you enjoy. So there's a few types. Yes, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and say that I think probably in part 2 of this, we'll go more into the types of philately and the differentiations between those different those items that Ken just mentioned. I just wanted to bring that in. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Let's see, get to the next page. So you can also collect based on geography. I would guess that the majority of collectors begin by collecting either their home country or the entire world. Many don't know how many stamps there are or the possibilities, and don't realize how overwhelming the entire world could be. I believe best estimate is there's about 750,000 postage stamps that have been issued since 1840. And that's just really traditional postage stamps. Now includes some varieties that the catalogs recognize. There's not 750,000 different designs and different formats of the same stamps and so forth. But that can be challenging, but for a lot of people, that's a great way to get started. Some people may want to try to get one stamp or from as many different countries as possible. And they won't go just with the, I don't know what it is, 185 or 190 that there are members of the United Nations. There have probably been over 600 stamp issuing entities. Now, many of them are dead countries, so to speak, don't exist any longer, or they've changed their names, or they've combined with other countries. Like, Czechoslovakia is not separating the Czech Republic and Slovakia, things like that. So there's a lot of changes. So you can try collecting the entire world, and nothing wrong. Just don't think that you're likely to ever get every single item. Single country, I'd say most frequently your home country or an ancestral country. Some people will collect regions, maybe US and Canada if you're from the United States, or if you're from Canada, maybe British North America. Canada at one point was separate provinces, basically, or maybe you're doing it by a continent such as Europe or Asia, or a more general, the Oceania or Pacific, perhaps, which may include more than just Australia. But another perfectly good way that seems to be a little bit more common for women than men is based on topic or theme. This is just this was just captured from the American Topical Association website. They're the largest national organization for collectors who specifically collect based on topics or thematics. You can see a number of them on there. That's certainly not all. You can literally have hundreds or thousands thousands of topics. I mean, Eric mentioned that I collect stamps related to blood donation. So that would be one. Medicine would obviously be broader. Red Cross would include some blood donation, but take into a lot of other things. Some people may collect, animals or dogs or cats or hedgehogs, or even outhouses. There's really no limit other than for some topics, there may not be a lot of items to collect, and that might be, you might see that as a positive, or you might see it as a negative. Others, there's going to be more than you probably can likely obtain. And some are going to be represented with stamps that are very expensive and you're not likely to have. Others, there may not be many stamps at all from the 19th century. And if you want older stamps, then the topic might not work. You can also collect based on whether the stamps have been used or not. The top is the 15-cent Colombian, issued in the US in 1893, a little bit late for the 400th anniversary of Columbus. The one on the left is unused. The one on the right, you can see, has a cancellation. Some people will collect both. Nothing wrong with that. Some people only want the stamps as they were issued by the post office without, being canceled. Others don't think the stamp even served its purpose if it's not canceled. So different perspectives. You just need to decide. Some may do the unused if they can afford the unused, but when the unused one is too expensive, they'll choose the used one. if the unused is going to be $100 and they can get the same stamp with a cancel for 50 cents, they may say, wow, I'm definitely going with the used on that. Postal history. Now, that's a broad term for really a stamp used on some sort of document going through the mail, typically an envelope. It could be a folded letter sheet, something like that. And it may have special markers, like the one here had Australian military forces passed by censor. Probably World War II era is my guess there. Or some people want to collect first day covers. This is another way of collecting artwork, because most first day covers have a cachet, which is normally artwork related to the stamp, normally in the left side of the envelope. And some people will collect just one stamp issue and all the different cachets that have been produced. Or some people will collect, some stamps are issued in multiple cities. When the U.S. Post Office Department became the United States Postal Service, they issued a stamp that basically was available at every post office in the U.S. On that first day. Some people call that the 7/1/71 affair, July 1, 1971. And there's some people that have collections of that stamp used on that first day from 40,000 different post offices around the U.S. Just giving you an idea of some of the things you can do. Or the types of stamps. A commemorative stamp basically normally honors somebody or an event, normally on a significant anniversary. So I believe this Canadian stamp, actually, if you look real closely, I think it says, was for the 100th anniversary of the birth of Alexander Graham Bell, issued in 1947. That would be a commemorative. Commemoratives are normally larger size stamps than definitives. The next one is the $2 from the 1938 presidential series, the United States stamps. Definitives sometimes don't have to be necessarily the first class rate. Traditionally, most commemoratives are the first class rate. But normally, at least the post office tries to have a number of different denominations to cover different rates. But most of the commemorative stamps that are issued, which are normally only available for a short period of time, normally no longer than a year, are normally first class rate. The definitives may be reprinted or available for many years. The 1938 $2 stamp was basically, well, it wasn't even a $2, or if you took the $5 denomination from 1938, it was in use till you had the Liberty Series one in the 50s. So 15 or more years, it was being used and available to pay that rate. More recently, people have done another category, often called special issues, which typically would cover like greeting stamps and holiday stamps, which probably have greater printings than most commemoratives, greater quantity. Sometimes maybe reprinted as well. If once the initial printings run out, they could be printed again if there's still demand. Some of the happy birthday ones or greeting stamps the U.S. has issued, they specifically have available for 2 years before they issue a new design. And then other types. Pre-cancels are stamps that are canceled before being mailed, normally as part of bulk mailings. Say the post office often passes on some discount on the cost of mailing something, and for the person often sorting that mail to some degree. Perfins, which could stand for perforated initials or perforated insignia. You can see an MP company, I think, is in this block of 12. And actually, that's a rare stamp there, because if you note, the two middle ones are 5-cent stamps and the others are 2s. That's not your standard stamp. That's one I'd love to have. But they were basically used to reduce pilferage from employees of companies. If companies had if they used perfins with their company initials or something, and you had outgoing mail that was clearly of a personal nature and it had a stamp with a perfin, well, then it came from the company's postage, not the individual. Some people will collect errors. Now, some errors don't have to be expensive. The most famous error for U.S. collectors is probably the inverted Jenny with the Curtis Jenny biplane flying upside down. yes, that's probably going to run you $250,000. So most of you probably can't afford something like that. Some people even collect counterfeits. Not a lot of counterfeits of U.S. stamps until recent years. Unfortunately, right now, there are a ton of the forever stamps being counterfeited, which are very hard to separate from the genuine. You could even collect based on different formats. I say sheet, but truly that's really a pane of stamps. There was probably, in that case, 2 panes to the full sheet, but that was the largest multiple that you could buy from the post office. Booklets, I show both the traditional booklet, which would normally have several pages and like a cardboard cover, and the newer type, what are often called convertible booklets that will fold to fit in your wallet that are self-adhesives. Coils are basically stamps sold in a roll, a long strip. Down below, I have some postal stationery, postal cards with the postage basically imprinted as part of the card, or an official envelope, and a holiday aerogram, which would be used to get a lower rate traditionally for sending mail overseas. You can't do any enclosures in that. You just can write on the sides of that. Full panes, I already said, singles, white blocks, so different configurations, different types like postage dues, airmails, official, special delivery. There's just an unlimited, possibilities. You can collect based on the era or reign of a monarch. Certain countries, British Commonwealth especially, may have the ruling monarch on basically just about every stamp while they're the ruling monarch. On the upper left is the very first postage stamp, the penny black. And Queen Victoria was on basically Great Britain stamps until her reign ended in 1901. Then they changed and replaced her with King Edward VII, then King George V, etc. Do you know when these were issued? You know your monarch reigns as well. The U.S., traditionally, we have an affiliate called the Classic Society, and traditionally they cut off as basically collecting stamps before the Bureau of Engraving and Printing got started. The first Bureau of Engraving and Printing produced U.S. stamps were in 1894, and then they produced almost all of them to the 1980s with a few exceptions. If you want, you could collect just self-adhesive stamps. You're not going to have many very early ones. The Peace on Earth one, I believe, was 1974, and that was the first U.S. self-adhesive. It may not be obvious in this, but in most of them, the self-adhesive gum has actually stained the stamps, and often the mint sheets, you pick one of those up, the stamps actually just fall off the sheet. Or forever stamps. Charlie Brown there we have on a forever stamp. Or size of stamps. This is one, maybe not the largest stamp, but it's certainly one of them. It's a $10 stamp from Canada. And in the lower right, you can see US, one of the smaller US stamps, the Indian head penny. And here, the Canadian one is 5 inches wide, 1.9 inches high. I'm not even sure you're going to fit that on a number 6 standard personal envelope. The Indian head penny one was printed 150 to a pane versus the typical definitive of 100 to a pane. But triangle shape, and I showed some here from Cape of Good Hope. These are very early stamps. So different shapes have existed for stamps for a long time. The Sierra Leone one was more produced for collectors, I think, but that's a self-adhesive, and that's, I believe, in the shape of the country. Other countries have done a variety of things. Switzerland, which is what the Helvetia stands for, it's an embroidered stamp. There's threads in that. Hologram stamps, the US and Canada and many other countries have. And yes, there are even scented stamps. These are some stamps from France, I believe. Yes, it says France in small, but there are a number of other countries that have used scented stamps. So any of those could be the basis of your collection. So we have a couple more questions here. If you would go ahead and answer what you collect with a few categories and Do you prefer used or unused, or doesn't make any difference to you? Oh, let's see, single country, multiple countries, worldwide. That's a good split. About a third are topical thematics. I did not expect postal history to be high. Generally, some people will start with stamps, and then they find that they can learn more and that there's more complexity to postal history. But very few people, I think, start with postal history. So I'm not surprised there. There's a lot of people here collecting first day covers, more than I would have guessed. Although some of those promotional things are often related to first day covers. And other have to look at the chat or whatever to try to figure out what the 11%, because that's a substantial number. But thank you for sharing that. Do we have a total for the used, unused, or both used and unused? If not, we can just go on.
Yeah, we'll go on and we'll try to come back to it.
Okay.
Thanks, folks.
So, Ken, I thought it would share on the screen, but the most common answer was about half of the respondents said both used and unused.
Okay.
Unused is about a third, and then the rest are used only.
And that I'm not surprised. I mean, used only is generally going to be less expensive. Most people don't start out spending a fortune on a hobby. Sometimes we start out not spending very much, and it affects us, and we spend a little bit more down the road, and we might change. But thank you. That's helpful. Okay. So acquisition, there's lots and lots of ways of acquisition. And no way is right or wrong. But certainly any mail that you get, hopefully many of you, I mean, when I started, anything that came into my family, and actually my grandfather was great. He would save all of the envelopes that came into him. I had an uncle and aunt. I had uncle and aunt who were missionaries in Africa. So I relied largely on family and others. And then there were some businesses or that I had ties to where, at least for brief periods of time, I got some of their mail as well, which certainly helped bolster. Now I had hundreds of, I can remember the 13-cent Liberty, Statue of Liberty coil from the American Can series of Scott 1618. And I probably had 250 copies of that and one copy of some of the commemoratives at the time. But that's okay. I kept track of that, and I didn't really do anything to separate, although that existed as a sheet, a booklet, and a coil, I believe. Another way is certainly from the post office, or if it's not for the country that you're in, that might be a philatelic bureau that offers the new issues from a country, or in some cases, there are companies that will represent multiple countries in, like, the US. At one point, you had like Unicover in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which was selling unused stamps from quite a few countries, or the Crown Agents is another that sold stamps from many countries. IGPC, Intergovernmental Philatelic Corp. So there are ones, and normally you're paying basically face value, or pretty close to face value in that case. Certainly if you're getting it from the post office. Now you may be paying some shipping or handling, but generally speaking, you're getting new issues as they come out, only ones currently available, and at pretty close to there may be currency conversions and so forth. Some people get started or go regularly to yard sales or estate sales. That is certainly nothing wrong with that. I mean, many of the collections are probably going to be of a similar nature, so you may get lots of duplication. They may not be a lot different, but nothing wrong with that. Increasingly today, many collectors, maybe not starting out, purchase online. That could be at eBay, which has quite a few items in their stamp category, or a more dedicated site for more specifically for stamp collectors, like a Hip Stamps or individual dealer websites. All those are perfectly good opportunities. Some who want to be social or may look for opportunities to get good deals may go to a stamp club meeting. The APS has about 400 and 20 chapters around the country. They can be found on the APS website, stamps.org/clubs. We'll bring up a search form. You can enter your zip code or your state to find ones nearest to you, and we'll say when they meet and so forth. For many of those stamp clubs, or for a decent number of them, buying and selling is the biggest activity that attracts people. Now, some will have programs, but many of them probably wouldn't exist. There's clubs like the Sacramento Philatelic Society that may have thousands of stamps available for a nickel each at every one of their meetings. And if you have a speaker, it's hard to get people away from looking through those thousands of stamps. I've faced that problem before myself, and I did not get everybody's attention. Bourses and stamp shows. A bourse is basically a location, often a hotel or community room or something, where typically a small number, could be a larger number of dealers would set up shop for a defined period. It might just be a few hours on one day. It could be a couple days. Some areas will have a bourse, I believe the Oregon Stamp Society in their building in the Portland area, one Saturday a month, or maybe 2 Saturdays, they have a bourse there. Stamp shows normally are a little bit larger and may have other aspects, including maybe some lectures or educational, maybe some exhibits, people showing portions of their collection competitively. And those things require a little bit more resources. So typically they would have more dealers, but not always. Traditional way that many people got their stamps would be approvals or sales circuits. There's still companies like Mystic and Kenmore that will send you approvals through the mail. The APS still has circuit sales. We sell on the order of $1 million a year through the mail from sales circuits. And we have them in about 185 different categories. So that's certainly a possibility. The mail order through price lists or advertisements in publications. There are not too many retail stores. Unfortunately, probably no more than around 100 in the US left. The market's changed more to online and some of these other options. So many of you may not be lucky enough to have a retail store, certainly one dedicated exclusively to stamps. In some cases, there may be stamp and coin or general hobby stores, but not a lot just dedicated to stamps anymore. And auctions. At the high end, you have auctions where you can, have no lot, which is going to sell for under $500 or $1,000. Most of the well-known auctions are probably beyond the level of a beginner, but they can be interesting if you want to attend. So which sources, I think this is our final question, which of the above sources have you used?
Well, folks are joining that poll. When we went to the Great American Stamp Show back in August, one of the conversations that came up a lot of times was counterfeiting. You mentioned that earlier in your talk, and it made me think that some people don't get into this because they're afraid of the pitfalls and especially of the world of getting duped. Is that a realistic is it a problem for especially folks new to stamp collecting that they really need to look out for? And I know we have some resources here that we
well, I mean, if you're spending a lot of money, you should it makes sense to know something about who you're purchasing, to understand what return policies, if any, when they would allow for a return, or if a stamp would turn out to be different than what they've identified or have a flaw. Are they a member of the American Philatelic Society, the American Stamp Dealers Association, or the National Stamp Dealers Association? I mean, I think it ramps up. I mean, if you're spending a couple dollars, you probably aren't going to do a lot of research. If you're spending $100 on a stamp, then it'd be best to know something. So personal, family, business mail, love to see that. A lot of people collecting new issues. Online is actually number one. Stamp Club is really high. much higher than I expected with over 50%. Forces shows is much higher than I expected. I think we have an advanced beginner class here there with those numbers. We still have over a quarter of the people doing approvals or sales circuits. Same number as mail order. And I'm not surprised at all that retail stores is the lowest. I'm actually surprised that that's 21%. So yeah, online, followed by the post office or philatelic bureau, new issue agents, followed by personal, family, business, mail, are the top three. But there's every one of those is at least 1 out of 5 people here tonight is used. So most of you have probably used multiple of those methods. Okay, let's go on. So different types of purchases. Mixtures or kiloware, which could be on or off. Kiloware comes from traditionally, okay, you buy a kilo of stamps, or basically 2.2 pounds of stamps. Mixtures can be different types, but it's often a way to get a lot of stamps at a relatively low cost, especially if it's a true unpicked mixture, which probably has lots and lots of duplicates. I remember when I was young, going to, from a department store or something, a treasure bag, probably guaranteed at least 500 stamps, probably for like $2.95 at that point in time. And probably I could remember one time where I think over half the stamps were 2 or 3 different Spanish stamps. Heavy duplication in general. If you have people to trade with, maybe, but they may be good to get a lot of stamps, have fun soaking a lot of stamps if they're all in paper, but you don't get to pick what you're getting, basically. A collection or accumulation, you hopefully at least have a chance to take a look before you purchase. Some of the mixtures, some would be described as 500 different US stamps from a certain period or something. That would at least tell you, but many mixtures are almost like grab bags. Collections or accumulations, generally there'd be a chance. Now, sets of stamps. Some dealers, for example, might only, I had the National Park series, I think it's of 1937 of the US. There is a 1 through 10 cent stamp. It's not particularly, I think the total catalog value is it's maybe a little bit, $6 or $7, something like that. But in many cases, a stamp dealer may not want to sell you an individual stamp, especially if it's part of a set. Topical collectors often run into this. They often have to buy the entire set, because if the stamp dealer sells one without the others, then they feel that they can't sell the others individually, or it's much harder to. So you can buy sets of stamps. You can certainly also buy individual stamps. Okay, so hopefully you've gathered some stamps. How are you going to organize your holdings? Again, there's not a correct way, but the first 2 things is probably the way that the majority of people would do it. Typically, if you're collecting multiple countries, you'd separate them by the country, and then probably by the date of issue or the denomination, which are often similar, similar to how most stamp catalogs would list them, a similar order. Now, you may not differentiate airmail or postage due, which are often, quote, back of the book in the catalog after all the regular issues. But most people would organize by country, probably roughly date of issue. But no problem if you want to organize them. You're a thematic collector. Maybe you collect animals and stamps. So you're going to organize your stamps by stamps that show cats, that show dogs, that show birds, that's perfectly fine. If you want to, you can do it in common, and any of these could be done in combination with each other by denomination. Normally, many countries, if you do it by denomination, that's a de facto way of getting close to the by date range, because unless your currency changes, in most cases, the postage rates increase over time. So the higher denomination ones are the more recent ones. We don't see a lot of decreases, at least since the 19th century. We haven't seen many decreases in the cost of postage. You may separate them by the format that they're come. Are they in a pane or sheet of stamps, or in the booklet, or a coil? Or You may have your singles separated from your plate blocks, from your full panes, from your covers. All those are perfectly fine. Those are all common ways that you might organize your holdings. Now, what would you use to store them in? Often people will start, especially if they're doing them by country, by having an envelope with the country name written on for, you might have one envelope for Australia, one for Bahamas, Belgium, you might have 150 different envelopes, and that'd be at least an initial way to sort it. You can't, generally speaking, an envelope, you can't see what's in there, but you can write something on the outside. There are also glassine envelopes, which I have pictured at the left, which are generally smaller than most envelopes, although glassines come in a wide variety of sizes, but you could put one or two or all the copies of a single stamp. They're not completely clear, but you can basically see what's in there normally. Some people will use stock books. I have in the middle, that looks like a pretty fancy stock book with pages, with clear strips, probably acetate strips that you can hold. You can put the stamps in the slot. You can move them around. You don't have to worry about if you change the order of how you want, or if you get something else. Some stock books would be a 3-ring binder where you could put an additional stock page in or remove them. It doesn't have the pictures that an album, a pre-printed album typically would, but it offers a lot of flexibility, especially when you're getting started. And then the cheaper version of a stock book or a stock page is using cardboard, basically, where manila cardboard, where you can only see a portion of the stamp versus the clearer ones in the middle there where you can see most of the stamp. Of course, there's printed albums. There's the Liberty album is an album just for United States. The Statesman album is an album that attempts to cover the entire world. There's also some blank pages that can be added to albums. In some cases, an album is perfect bound, which is not very good to, basically, you can't add pages to it. Some are loose leaf, but not your traditional 3-hole punch, I guess is what I would say, or a different size than 8.5 by 11. Others, could be 8.5 by 11, where you could add or create your own pages, either probably on a heavier stock than just a regular paper. And there's a number of, there's downloadable stamp album pages as well. I just put a listing from the internet. It includes the American Philatelic Society. We have a number of downloadable album pages. They're mini albums. Some are for states, or some are for a topic like baseball or whatever. And those are basically PDF files, but those are all options. If you don't use the stock book where you can slide the stamp in the pocket, whether it be like a manila card pocket or an acetate clear strip, you can use hinges, or you can use mounts if you're using it in a regular album. A hinge is basically a piece of gummed paper that's normally folded. And if you look at the upper right corner, you normally attach, it's normally folded so that about 25% is on one side, smaller, and then a larger part on the other. You normally attach the small portion to the upper top of the stamp, and then attach the bigger portion to the album page. They're designed to be removable so that you can take a stamp off a hinge, at least when it's dried, hopefully, without damaging the stamp, without thinning the stamp. And if you want to spend more, especially if they're unused stamps and you're concerned about the gum, there's mounts, all kinds of mounts that are available. These can be strips of mounts, where you put a stamp in and you cut the strip at the appropriate width, or there's pre-cut ones that are available. It can be purchased for different sizes, like commemorative stamps or definitive stamps or jumbo stamps or different countries. I'll also include a triangular one at the bottom right, which is basically a corner mount, which could be used to mount an envelope on a page just by sliding the corner of the envelope and using anywhere from 2 to 4 of these at each of 2 to 4 of the corners. And I also mention or show you tongs. Now, if they're really inexpensive stamps that you're getting off your own mail. It's supposed to be fun, so we don't want to make it, but your fingers do have oils. If you don't keep your fingers clean, they can certainly impact the stamps. So I have a pair of tongs right here. There's a variety. You can have tongs with spade ends or rounded ends or pointy ends. It's a way of handling stamps. They're different, although the British would call them tweezers. In the United States, we differentiate between tongs and tweezers in that tongs don't have any ridges to grip anything that might damage a stamp here. So this is, flat. There's no ridges to grip a stamp. But that's a couple, tools, basically. We'll get into some more next week or 2 weeks from now. And I think I made it just about so let's turn to questions.
Thank you so much, Ken. That is pretty good timing. Folks, we did promise that we would go long. Normally we try to cut this to 8 o'clock, but we're going to run to 8:15. And we have way more questions than 8:15 will allow. So if we don't get to your question, please excuse us. Some of those will probably fit into Stamp Collecting 101 Part 2, or however many other parts we can get Ken to do. This is a question that came in during the show, Ken, and because we get this question all the time at the APS, I want to start with this one. How much can you trust online purchases? This comes from Tor Steen.
Well, again, I mean, if it's a 50-cent purchase, a $1 purchase, you have a lot less concern. If you're purchasing something for $500 or $1,000, I hope you're doing due diligence. There are certainly stamps that are both unintentionally and intentionally misrepresented. More likely on a site like eBay than somebody who's a stamp dealer and puts on their site that they're an APS member or an ASDA member, which is American Stamp Dealers Association, or an NSDA, National Stamp Dealers Association, or other references. There is a lot of stamps that are misidentified in eBay. Many of those, the sellers don't know better. They're not necessarily trying to rip you off, but they aren't stamp collectors themselves. They saw this item, which, they go on the internet and they think it's a Scott 613, a 2-cent Harding, worth $25,000. And they don't even know the difference between rotary press and flat plate, or don't even necessarily know how to measure the perforations on a stamp. So they're not necessarily intending to cheat you, but there's certainly stamps that are misrepresented. So, you need to use prudent caution. If you're paying by PayPal or credit card, I think you probably will have a little bit more protection, but know who you're purchasing from, look at their ratings and so forth. And if you're doing something really expensive, then you need to be careful. Doesn't matter where they are or what they are. I mean, you should be using, if you're spending a lot of money, and that can differ for what people consider a lot of money. For some of you, $10 might be a lot of money for a stamp. For others, it might be $500 or $1,000. Find out return policies. Find out if they have professional memberships. Get some of those before the deal might be too good to be true.
This feels like you've completely set this question up perfectly, but for those folks who are new to stamp collecting and new to the APS, you're the director of expertizing. You always get that question, what exactly is that? And since we're talking about value and what's the boundary for, making sure that you're getting what you want, do you want to describe what expertizing is briefly? And
very briefly, it's way beyond what we consider Stamp Collecting 101, but expertizing is basically authentication of a postage stamp. Individuals send the stamp into us, pay a fee. We have a team of experts who will examine the stamp, report what we believe the stamp catalog number is, believe any faults that describe the condition. Is it used? Is it unused? Does it have thins? Everything that, you would want to know about the stamp, basically, for deciding whether you want to purchase or not. It's not a short process. It's probably going to take at least 60 days for the APS to get, and maybe longer than that. to do it, and it's not inexpensive. Unfortunately, you can't use it for 10-cent or 25-cent stamps. Well, you can, but the minimum fee even for an APS member is $25. It does come with a 5-year limited guarantee, but it's basically a way of getting some guarantee that what you're purchasing is what it's being represented as and is in the condition that it's being represented as. If you're purchasing an expensive stamp and the person you're purchasing it from won't tell you that they will return, that you can return it if it comes back other than expertise, if it comes back other than they identified it as, I wouldn't purchase it from them. That would be a big red flag.
Good. Thank you for that explanation. This looks like one of those interesting questions that probably has people battling back and forth on it. What is the best hinge to use for putting stamps in albums?
I don't know what the best hinge is. I mean, traditionally, and I think the one picture I showed was a packet of Denison, which were, at least among stamp collectors, it's a legend that they are by far the best, and they can't be reproduced anymore either because some of the components, are carcinogenic or different formulas or so forth. I think that actually several of the brands of hinges being offered today are basically just like many of your store brands for something you buy at the grocery store. It's the same product, just different packaging. I think the greater issue is when you're hinging a stamp, don't use too much moisture. I normally just wet my finger with my tongue and then tap my finger on the hinge. But don't use too much moisture, especially if it's an unused stamp. I can't tell you that one hinge is necessarily better. I mean, it probably depends upon the type of gum, and there's all kinds of different types of gum on stamps. So I'm not sure that one is best for everything.
So if you have a slobbery dog, that is not a good way to hinge stamps or do almost anything related to stamps, is what you're saying.
I would agree with that.
All right. This is a good beginning collector question because a lot of the stamps I know we have in our warehouse are on paper versus off paper. This woman's name is Amy. I have canceled stamps on envelopes dating back to the 50s and 60s. Do I remove them? And if so, what's the best method? That's a lot of people encounter stamps that way, so I thought it was worth asking.
And some advanced collectors would say it's always better to leave the stamps in the envelope. However, realistically, I mean, how much space do you have? And if there's special markings on the envelope, if it has sensor markings, if there's something unusual, maybe an auxiliary marking, return to sender, or something that's unusual, leave it on. For most worldwide stamps, at least until the self-adhesive era, which didn't start every place the same time, you can soak them off just in water. I would generally use lukewarm water. If it's really hot, the stamps some will be run a little bit more, the colors. There are a few stamps, some early Great Britain stamps that use fugitive inks that you do not want to, and the Scott catalogs generally have a warning not to soak those stamps, but the vast majority of postage stamps up to the self-adhesive era, you can just soak off in typical, water out of your faucet. I would stick them in a small bowl, let them, be in there 15 minutes or so. Most will peel off. There's still gum on the back. I'd leave them in a little bit longer, let that gum dissolve, and then I typically use an old towel and let them dry in the old towel. You could use paper towels. There are special drying books, but it doesn't have to be difficult. Now, the most recent U.S. self-adhesives, most of them do not soak by means of normal water, and many of the sellers of the recent U.S. stamps in our APS circuit books are selling them on the paper, not even removing them. There are some ways to remove them. I believe we have at least 1 or 2 videos on our website on removing self-adhesive stamps from paper, but that's beyond, I think, tonight's course. And, it's up to you, but many people are just cutting around, careful not to cut into the perforations, but leaving just a little bit of margin and cutting around for the recent U.S. self-adhesives. Some other countries' self-adhesives almost all have soakable gum. Some of the earlier U.S. ones had soakable gum, but virtually none of the current U.S. self-adhesives have soakable gum. And when I say soakable, I mean in water, not in a chemical.
It's a great answer. I see a bunch of people comment in the chat while you were talking that for self-adhesives, they get their, I'm sure that we have a couple surgeons in this group that they just surgically remove the paper or trim it. So
yeah,
you mentioned a couple questions came in, so and you mentioned this before, the circuits and what people do to save stamps and circuits. Some people don't even know what a circuit is. Do you mind spending a minute describing that?
No, I'll start with the APS has what we call circuit books. They're different size books, and some have different numbers of spaces on pages. But the one has 16, I think, spaces for 16 stamps on a page. Members who have duplicates or are looking to sell material will mount them up in a book, hopefully all in one country or a group, and put them in order. It's a lot of work to prepare the book. We'll price them. We'll normally put down the catalog value and how much they want. They mail them into us. We take digital photographs of every single page before we send them out. And then people who want to receive stamps of that category, and as I said earlier, we have about 185 categories. Many of them are just a single country category, like Belgium. But for something like US, you could ask for just US 19th century stamps or just US pre-cancels. And we would typically send a group of books, hopefully about 10 books, ideally at least $1,000 value there. And we send it to a group of people who are geographically close to each other, if possible. We send it to the first person. They look through, they can remove any items they want. They put a mark in the space for the ones that they have taken and basically send a report form to us and payment. Then they send it on to the second person on the who's wanted that same type of material in their same geographic area. The last person, there could be up to 10 people receiving this consecutively, would send it back to the APS. APS would check in, make sure everything's been paid for, everything matches up, and would send out a new batch of books to the same category to the same people, but the person who was first would go to the end of the list. So eventually everybody is first in order. It's basically a type of approvals. And there are other opportunities. I believe the International Society of Worldwide Stamp Collectors has an exchange service. It's not exactly circuits, but it's not that different. Yes, actually, I just see Dan Edwards said International Society of Worldwide Stamp Collectors have stamp trade circuits for large, small, and CTO stamps. Thank you, Dan. I'm actually member 39, I believe, of the ISWSC. I think 1986 I joined. Somebody was asking how much of a margin. I would leave about a 1/4 inch around if you're cutting a self-adhesive, leaving it on paper. I'd leave about a 1/4 inch margin. You get much less than that, and you might just slip and cut the perforations, and that would be a damaged stamp. Somebody's asking what CTO stamps are. I'm sorry, stealing your thunder here, Eric. That's canceled the order. Dan answered. Some countries will sell stamps to collectors, but they don't want any chance that the collectors will use them. So the cancellations, they are canceled before they're sold. The cancels typically will just hit the corner. They're not going to obstruct the design. In some cases, the cancellations may actually even be printed on the stamps when the stamps are printed. Some people collect those. Some people won't collect a canceled to order. Very often, a postally used stamp will sell for more than a canceled to order stamp. Especially it was known for Eastern European countries and Middle East countries raising currency, especially in the 60s, 70s. But some other countries, including what I'll call first world countries, Australia has sold canceled to orders. Many times canceled to order stamps will have full gum on the reverse. That is correct. Not always, but more often than not, I would say.
Okay, I've got another one of those practical questions. What are the plus and minus effects of acid-free paper storage albums?
Well, the minus is it's going to cost you a lot more. It's obviously a good practice. However, I mean, I think it depends upon, if you're if your stamps are 5 cents each or 10 cents each or 15 cents each, you might spend more on the pages than you spend on the stamps. You just have to make that, you have to decide what is best for you. I mean, obviously you can get mounts, you can get page protectors, you can get lots of things that are archival quality. It's going to cost you a lot more. If the cost no longer allows you to collect stamps and have the fun, then it may be a bad choice. Even if it might be the right thing for long-term preservation of the stamps. So I would look at it, if I'm doing $100 stamps or something like that, yeah, I would certainly be thinking about using some more of the acid-free paper, archival, make sure my mounts are appropriate for archival purposes, things like that. If I'm mounting stamps that I'm cutting out from the mail I'm getting today, I'm not going to go to those lengths. But it's your decision. What you decide is right, not for nobody else to tell you what's right or wrong.
And a lot of the conversation here is about that there's not one way to collect stamps, and there's not one reason, and everything has variables to it. Here's one that kind of leans into this, and I am such a beginner that I don't even know what this question is. Is it best to store your stamps and albums flat or standing?
Generally speaking, standing. Flat is if they're unused stamps, they're more likely to get stuck down with the pressure. Standing normally gives them a little bit more air circulation, but it's best actually to do standing, but also to look at your stamps from time to time, to open those pages, to go through those pages and make sure there are no insects that have gotten in them, or that there's mold or something, because you have them in your basement and you had a leak from the window or whatever. So definitely standing is better than flat. Definitely if you looking at them occasionally will be better too. That airs them out. You hopefully would catch anything before anything major would happen.
Great. Thank you. This question, we're going to probably get to about 2 or 3 more. Again, thank you all for a great variety of questions, both before we even went online here, went live, and during. So, and also I want to thank a lot of people for making really, really nice, lovely comments about the helpfulness of this and how relevant this was to their experience right now. We have a lot of new folks coming back to stamp collecting, it looks like. So this has been a great session. Okay, this question is, of course, interesting to me because this is basically my job, so I'm hoping you'll just answer this perfectly. Eddie Gonzalez says, most collectors I know are older than me, mid-50s. I fear for the future of philately. We have this conversation in the building every day, all the time. Younger generation does not seem to be that interested. Do you have an opinion on this? Do you have any? There is hope, right?
Oh, well, I think there's hope. I mean, if you want to, for many people would say the 1930s were the heyday of philately in the U.S. You had a president of the United States who collected stamps, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You had like Captain Tim's radio show on stamps, send in ivory soap, send in, I don't know, 10 ivory soap wrappers and get 25 U.S. stamps or something. However, at that point in time, the U.S. or the APS had 5,000 or 6,000 members. Right now, we're over 25,000 members. Certainly things change. There's a lot more there was nothing online then. We didn't even know what the internet would be then. eBay probably has $100 million in sales a year on their stamp site. Yes, I'm concerned. Phones and other electronic devices seem to, grab a lot of people's attention. But at the same time, it's certainly, I think, helpful to expose youth to stamps at a young age. Very well, perhaps I should have had a question here, but very few people collect straight through. Very few. There's never been a time where there's been a lot of high school students that are stamp collectors or college students. Typically, it's something that you would come back to at some point in your life. Sometimes when you're trying to introduce your own kids to it as a hobby. Sometimes when your own kids are now out of the house and you're not paying for their college or carting them off to sports events or other things all the time. So yes, the average age of APS members has certainly grown, but our life expectancy has certainly grown too. In 1943, I think the average life expectancy of a male in the US was 66. That's when we basically were offering free life membership for people who had been an APS member for 30 years and reached age 65. Wasn't much risk at that. Now today, many people, 80s, 90s, especially stamp collectors, because there have been a number of studies that show somebody involved in a hobby, doesn't have to be stamp collecting, often has a longer life expectancy. They keep their mind active. They're, using, and so it can be positive. So yes, it's something to be concerned about. But we have to adapt and find new ways, and there are cycles on everything, up and down. I mean, at one point, Beanie Babies or other things are popular, and they do. There's a cyclical nature to many things. So I'm certainly not giving up on the hobby.
Great answer. This is a fantastic discussion. I'm so sorry to have to shut this down. We could probably go another hour. Good news is that we will have another one of these 2 weeks from now. This is where I get to put my plug in for October 24th. That is part 2. I'm going to screen share for a second here. Next week, we have, is everyone seeing that? We have Alex Hyman. He has been involved in Clash of Empires exhibiting and research for quite a while. And so we got a chance to hear him talk about putting that together. I want to thank everyone again for a lot of great questions. This has been recorded. This will be online on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow or at the very latest by the end of the week, along with about 150 other stamp chats from the past few years and the 7 previous ones from this season. So we have next week, come back next Tuesday. Thank you very much, Ken, for your time and your energy. This has been a great session. We look forward to another one in a couple of weeks. Thanks everyone for great questions and a great conversation and a great set of chats. If you have any questions directly for Ken, he's always available. He's happy to answer some of those, and we'll pass along your questions if you didn't get them answered online to him directly. So thank you very much for a great session, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you in a week.
Oh, okay. Somebody asked about the tie.
Yeah, I answered that one.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but I'll have to put on a different tie for the next one.